The mansion was built like a promise no one intended to keep. White stone, tall windows, hedges clipped to mathematical precision, and fountains that ran all night as if they, too, were paid by the hour. Daniel Carter's fortune had purchased a view of the entire city, a staff of people who moved like clock hands, and quiet always quiet. But the quiet didn't feel like peace, felt like waiting. He stepped out of the car at dusk, jacket folded over one arm, the other hand fishing for a phone that had been buzzing through the ride up the hill. He didn't look at the water as it fell into the fountain's milky bowl, didn't look at the sky bruising into purple. He was already thinking about the Asia call at midnight and the underwriting syndicate's sudden nerves. Deals had rhythms. You had to listen for them. You had to know when to lean. "Welcome home, sir," someone murmured. The door opened to light and the faint scent of lemon oil. The marble floor reflected the chandelier like a second sun, carefully printed on stone. "Where is he?" Daniel asked, shrugging into habit, his voice low. He tried to sound casual, tried to sound like this was a question with a predictable answer. Like all the others he asked in offices where people wore suits that reflected his face back at him. But the staff could hear the fissure beneath. "In the family room," the butler replied, "with Ms. Rosa." Rosa, the name still felt new in the house. She had arrived 2 weeks ago, no agency, no pedigree, a quiet interview, a steady gaze. She didn't say much. She had taken the job as if she were accepting a responsibility rather than a paycheck. Daniel paused in the hallway. He could hear a sound, not music, not the television, something softer. He followed it without thinking, as if pulled and stopped. At the doorway to find the family room, lit in a warm pool from a lamp. On the carpet, no shoes allowed on that carpet, he remembered. Because Ethan liked to feel his son sat cross-legged, 8 years old, with his dark hair tangled and his shoulders hunched in that familiar curl, like a comma in the middle of a sentence. In front of him, toy cars, lined up in precise rows, parallel, equidistant, color-coded, blue, blue, green, green, yellow. Then red. He moved them with the gentleness of a librarian turning pages. He did not look up. Beside him, Rosa sat with her legs tucked under, a cushion propped against her hip. She wore the house uniform navy skirt, white blouse and an apron smudged with flour. She had been baking. Daniel could smell cinnamon, and another scent he could never name. The one that made the house feel occupied rather than staged. Rosa tilted her head toward the cars. "You made a race?" she said. "I can see how they're on their mark." "Waiting for the flag?" Ethan didn't answer. A small finger shivered over the hood of a red car. The muscle in Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew better than to speak from the doorway. He knew even his shadow at the wrong angle could set off a storm Ethan couldn't name. He simply watched. That had become his skill in fatherhood. The art of watching without being seen. Rosa reached out, very slowly, the way you ease into cold water. She pointed, not touching, at the red car. "Is this the leader?" Ethan's eyes flicked. It was less than a glance, more like a bird's wing beat. He looked at her face, at the space where her eyes weren't, then down again. He nudged the red car forward by an invisible measurement. Rosa smiled, not a showy smile, more like the corner of a warm thought. "Red is fast," she said, letting the words be light. "Red is strong, silent, stretched." Daniel counted his breath. He felt ridiculous for counting and kept counting anyway. Ethan's lips parted. Sometimes it was like this, a word arriving at the edge of a cliff and peering over, deciding whether to jump fast, he whispered. It was a sound like glass turning to water. Daniel didn't move. He didn't blink. Fear prickled his arms, fear that if he breathed, it would vanish, like mist blown off a pond. Rosa didn't say, "Good job." She didn't clap. She nodded, as if they had concluded something between equal minds. "Yes," she said. Fast. Ethan moved the red car to the end of the row, set it precisely at an angle. Then took the second red car from the green row, a violation of his own system, Daniel thought, startled, and placed it behind. The first, he hovered, then pushed both forward a fraction. He made a quiet sound that was not a word. Not yet, but it had the shape of joy. Rosa's voice was soft. Can I hold one?
Wethers.
Wad. Reger. Water. It was the kind of request that used to make therapists' faces tighten, giving agency to a child, whose rules could be traps for him. But Rosa didn't look like she was making a point. She looked like she was asking permission in someone else's home. Ethan picked up the third red car and placed it in her open palm. Her fingers didn't close around it. She kept her hand flat, the car resting like a little heartbeat. Thank you, she said. I'll keep it safe. From the doorway, something in Daniel gave way. It didn't break. It surrendered. Not to defeat, but to a change in gravity. He could see, with unadorned clarity, that the moment he had been buying searches for had arrived not in a specialist's notebook, not in a clinic with pastel chairs, but here, at eye level, with a woman who treated his son as if he were a person, who could lend things and keep his own rules and share them when he wished. Later, the house would exhale again into its usual rhythms. He would change, wash his hands, stand at the window, and pretend to look at the city. Flashes of boardrooms would try to reassert themselves, men waiting, numbers in columns. The Asia call waiting like a tide you could choose not to notice until it was over your head. But in that doorway, he was only a father, and he was starving for a sound his son had finally given him. Rosa looked up and saw him. She didn't startle. She nodded as if they were co-conspirators in a tender heist. Ethan didn't notice. He moved the red car in Rosa's hand a centimeter, aligning it with his, too. Rosa said 3, 2, 1. Barely above a breath, together, they slid their cars forward, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel heard his son laugh. Asterisk. The next morning, the mansion smelled like cinnamon and something buttery that snagged memory Sundays from childhood. Before money became the language of safety, Daniel walked into the kitchen to find Rosa standing by the island, a cooling rack, holding a regimen of small round buns. Ethan stood on a stool, hands pressed against the marble, his face close enough to feel the steam. Too hot, Ethan whispered. Rosa glanced at him. We wait, she said. Waiting is part of enjoying. Daniel leaned on the doorframe. He had practiced making himself harmless in his own home. If he arrived too quickly, too loudly, Ethan's shoulders would climb toward his ears, and the morning would fracture. So he lingered, watching the choreography that had appeared without consultation, Rosa moving slowly enough to announce each action. Ethan tracking with those bright, darting eyes. She caught sight of Daniel, and something glanced across her face. Respect, yes, but not the brand his board used, not deference the way marble floors demanded it. She wiped her hands on a towel. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Daniel, he said. He always said it, and never knew whether people believed him. What are those? Panda cocoa? She said. Coconut buns? My grandma made them when money was thin. Flour and patience, she used to say. The coconut makes it feel like a celebration, even when you're just trying to stretch $1. Ethan's fingers curled. Dollar, he echoed as if testing texture. Daniel startled the way every word out of his son's mouth had the weight of a bell tone. Rosa's eyes warmed. $1 is 1, 10 dimes, 4 quarters. But this, she tapped the counter lightly 3 times. This is waiting. Rosa set a timer, ticking loud enough for Ethan to hear, but not sharp enough to jab. She poured water into 3 glasses and slid one toward Daniel without looking, as if she had measured his thirst too. He took it, irritated by the way gratitude felt like exposure. How did you learn? He asked, the moment growing a skin of awkwardness. He wanted to peel away. He didn't know how to ask the larger question. How did you reach him? Rosa took a bun and broke it open to show Ethan the steam like a cloud. My son, she said simply. He's 16 now.
Ow.
When he was little, he did not like smoke alarms or tags in shirts, or the sound of people laughing too loudly if he wasn't laughing too. People suggested methods. She smiled at the word, and the smile held a small private ache. But he taught me. You can't pull a flower open, you wait for it. Ethan leaned forward, nostrils flaring, and Rosa lifted the broken bun too within. A safe smelled distance. Sweet, she said. Do you smell sweet? Ethan made a sound that wasn't a word but wasn't nothing. They ate. Rosa tore the buns into equal pieces, two for Ethan, one for Daniel, one for herself, and arranged them in a pattern on a plate. Daniel noticed the symmetry. He noticed, too, that when Ethan's piece wasn't aligned the way he wanted, Rosa didn't correct him. She rotated the plate until the world made sense again. After breakfast, the house began its daily performance. Emails, calls. A meeting in the study that turned into a call that turned into another call. A chain that wrapped around his day and pulled him. Well, Daniel watched the hours drain and felt the familiar guilt between presence and providing. He was always failing at something. But even as he typed, even as he talked numbers and risk measures and time horizons, a part of him hovered in the family room, listening for laughter. It wasn't all ease that afternoon. A vacuum started up in the hall. Ethan flinched. Fine, Daniel wanted to say to himself, to the staff, to the building shivering in his chest. He saw the flinch turn to a stiffening, the stiffening to a tremble. Rosa was already there, the vacuum stopping as if it had been a living thing that understood a stop sign. Rosa knelt. Loud, Ethan said, his voice tight like a trapped thread. Yes, she said. She didn't say it's okay right away. She named it first. Loud. We can make a plan. Loud for 10, then quiet. Do you want to count? Ethan shook his head so hard, his hair slapped his forehead. Okay, she said. Then I count, and you can borrow my calm. She put her hand, palm up on the carpet, not touching him, and began. 1, 2, 3. She breathed like the ocean, the slow kind, not the storm kind. By 6, Ethan's fists opened. By 8, he scooted until his shoulder touched her elbow, the smallest connection, like the corner of a blanket. At 10, she clicked the vacuum off. She waited after. A minute, he whispered again, her head tipped. Again. Loud for 10, he said, as if proving to himself that he could survive his own environment. They did it again. When it was over, Rosa said, You did that, and left it at that. No confetti, no parade. Doherty handed back. That evening. The housekeeper, Carmen, who had been here long enough to feel territorial about routines, cornered Rosa by the pantry. Daniel didn't mean to overhear, but he had gone for a glass of water and found himself an eavesdropper in his own life. You're good with him? Carmen said, and the compliment had barbs. Rosa smiled without surrender. He's good with himself, she said. I'm just learning the map. Be careful, Carmen said. This house chews people up when they get attached. Rosa folded a towel, each corner snug against its mate. Maybe it's time the house learned to digest. Kindness. The sentence lodged in Daniel's chest. He carried it upstairs and set it on the bedside table with his watch, his phone, the detritus of control. He thought about her son, 16, somewhere across the city, a map known to Rosa like her own palm. And thought about the way she spoke. To Ethan with a kind of reverence, not for his fragility, but for his sovereignty. He thought about the word that had poured from his son's mouth yesterday fast and how it had ricocheted through him. Rearranging furniture inside rooms he had never entered. Before sleep, he stood in the doorway of Ethan's room. The night light made a small moon on the wall. Ethan lay with his head tilted slightly toward the open door, breathing the way sleeping. Children breathe, which always sounds like forgiveness. Rosa had tucked him in, one hand on his hair for exactly 3 seconds, he counted on. Then she left. As if she had a metronome built into her bones that knew when to go. Daniel watched. His son and understood, dimly and too late, that rules could be both lifeboats and cages. The trick was to know which was which on which day, and to love the person enough to ask. He was learning it now at the speed of trust. Down the hall, a soft humming threaded through the house. Rosa again, her melody not demanding to be heard, but there like a lighthouse you keep on because someone might need it. He lay down and stared at the ceiling. He had been in love before, so he thought with women he met at fundraisers, in galleries, on planes, faces that looked good in photographs, laughs that fit the rooms where power congratulates itself. But this was different, this thing turning. Over in him like soil disturbed by a slow, honest rain. He closed his eyes and let the house breathe. Somewhere, a clock ticked. Somewhere, a woman remembered to turn off a light she hadn't turned on. Somewhere, his son dreamed of red cars. Asterisk. Asterisk, the idea came from a flyer tucked into the mail. A sensory-friendly morning at the Museum of Transportation. Before the doors opened to the general public, low lights, reduced noise, quiet zones. Daniel hesitated. Outings were like crossing rope bridges. Maybe fine, maybe not, and the ground too far below to risk casual steps. But Rosa stood with the flyer in her hand like a passport. Maps, she said to Ethan, holding it out.
Out.
Want to go see big machines with gentle lights? Gentle, Ethan repeated, and watched the edges of the paper as if the answer were printed there. They went on a Saturday, early enough for the city to feel like it had not yet made up its mind about itself. Daniel drove. Rosa sat in the back, with Ethan narrating the turns like a bedtime story. Left at the tall tree with the crooked branch. Right when the road dips and makes your stomach feel playful. Straight past the bakery that smells like mornings. Ethan stared out the window and tapped his knee. His tapping had rhythms. Fast meant worry, slow meant thinking, and today it was somewhere in between. Angel kept his eyes on the road, counting. Green lights like prayers granted. The museum opened a side door just for them and a small cluster of other families who knew this calendar and built their lives around it. The air inside felt padded. Signs read, "Quiet area this way. Headphones available." This exhibit dimmed slowly. Daniel's chest unclenched in increments he could feel, like a lock tumbling. They started with the model trains. Ethan usually avoided simulations, fake things pretending to be real, but the trains ran on tracks that matched his inner rails, loops and switches. Predictable arcs. He pressed a button, and a bell sounded. He flinched, then looked at Rosa. She gave him a thumbs up with her pinky tucked slightly in, a sign they had invented together for, "I'm here." He pressed the button again. The train chugged. "Red," Ethan whispered, pointing at the caboose. He didn't look at Daniel, but he leaned an imperceptible fraction toward him, as if making space for someone else to share the sight. A volunteer offered a conductor's cap. "For him," the man said brightly. "The way people do when they don't know what a hat can feel like to a head that registers the world at." High resolution. Rosa fielded it with grace. "We're looking with our eyes today," she said, her voice grateful and firm. And the man nodded and went to a family that wanted props. They moved to the room with actual engines. Big iron beasts, and for a minute Ethan froze. He stood too still, the way certain animals do, trusting invisibility to keep them safe. The machines towered. The smell of oil was like a shoulder pressed into your nose. Rosa crouched beside him. "This is the loud room," she said. "We can visit it with our eyes from far away, or we can walk along the edge. Which one do you want to try first?" Ethan's jaw worked. "Edge," he said finally, sounding like someone had rubbed the word smooth with many hands before it entered the air. They walked the edge. Daniel on one side, Rosa on the other, like bookends, pretending not to hold up the same story. Ethan counted rivets with his fingertip as if keeping score with the building. When an engine hissed unexpectedly or releasing like a hidden sigh, Ethan jolted and his breath sped up. The shallow, rapid kind? Before panic could gather, Rosa said, "Breathe with me," and matched his pace until hers fell slower, and his too, followed like a tethered boat settling. In the cafe afterward, they sat with juice and a muffin divided into perfect thirds. Ethan lined the 3 segments on the tray. Daniel, Rosa, Ethan left to right, then right to left, finally stacked as family. Rosa asked gently. Ethan didn't answer. He ate his piece, then touched Daniel's wrist quickly. Like lightning kissing a tree, and everything inside Daniel went tall and quiet. On their way out, they passed a glass wall looking down into a workshop where a team restored a 100-year-old trolley. A woman in coveralls sanded a wooden panel with reverence. Ethan pressed his palm to the glass. "Fixing," he said. "Yes," Rosa said, "fixing with care." Outside, the day had warmed. People queued at the main doors, noise pooling at the threshold. A boy laughed too loud. A stroller squeaked. Ethan's shoulders tightened. The map of the day needed a new route. "Back this way," Rosa said, and led them around the building, through a sculpture garden where metal birds pretended to sing. They found a bench under a tree whose branches made dappled light, which Ethan liked because shadows in circles are friendlier than shadows in lines. They sat, and the wind rearranged the leaves into a softer pattern. Rosa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then away, and Daniel saw her face fold a little. "Is everything all right?" he asked. She hesitated. She wasn't the hesitating kind. "My son," she said. "He had a rough morning with his father. Nothing new. Words are easier than listening in some houses." Daniel nodded, the kind of nod that says, "I won't ask for more than you want to give." "What's his name?" "Leek," she said, and the syllables carried photographs. A baby asleep on a chest, toddler with juice on his chin, teenager too big for his jacket but wearing it anyway because it was his. "Does he like trains?" Daniel asked. "He likes taking apart the toaster to see how it glows," she said, and the laugh that climbed into her voice smoothed her worry. "He keeps screws in jars and wires and shoeboxes like they're pets." Ethan slid off the bench and knelt to examine the way the tree's roots broke the ground. "Fixing," he said again, and traced a crack with his finger as if memorizing it in case the earth needed someone to put it back together later. On the drive home, Ethan fell. Asleep, head lolling toward Rosa's shoulder, she adjusted without waking him, making of her body a shape the boy could sleep against. Daniel watched in the rearview mirror and saw himself reflected. A man who could acquire companies and cancel a flight mid-air with one phone call. Father who had flown red-eye in his mind for 8 years without landing. Back at the house, Rosa carried Ethan inside. The way you carry something valuable without making a big deal about its value. He stirred and wrapped his arms briefly around her neck, an embrace so sudden and pure that it stunned Daniel where he stood, coat half on. Jealousy flared dark and ugly and then burned away, leaving an ache that looked like humility. Wasn't that Rosa had something that had been stolen from him? Was that his son had something he needed? Rosa knew how to hold it. As afternoon stretched, a call waited for Daniel, a crucial one. He stood in his office, city unfurling. In the windows like someone else's fortune, and stared at the phone. He had never not taken a call like this. He had never said, "Not now. The museum day changed the weather inside my house." He didn't say it out loud. He just let the call ring, and then pressed silence. Somewhere down the hall, Rosa was humming, and his son's laughter, small and precise-threaded. The air he didn't know what to call the feeling taking up residence in him. Planting herbs on a windowsill that had only ever held in voices. He only knew it moved him in a way that deals never had. From calculation toward risk, but a risk measured in presence, not percentages. That evening, Rosa packed a container of coconut buns to take home. "For Malik," she said, tapping the lid. "He says coconut tastes like staying." "He's welcome here," Daniel said before he knew he'd decided to say it. "If you ever want," Rosa's eyes searched his face, weighing the offer against the world. "Thank you," she said. "We'll see. He guards his spaces like treasure." "So do I," Daniel said quietly, and watched her put the container in her bag with the care you give to something that can bruise. It started with a photo. Daniel at his front door, Rosa 3 steps behind, Ethan in between with his hand out, reaching for an invisible beetle in the hedges. The light was gentle, the kind that makes skin look like it remembers childhood. If from a distance, it was sweet. Up close, it was fodder. The tabloid ran it with a headline that did what headlines do when they're hungry. It's a story guessed more than it reported. Money, scandal, and a maid, the trinity that sells even to people who pretend they don't buy by noon. Daniel's phone throbbed. His general counsel called. "Do you want to respond?" His communications director texted, "We can squash." A board member emailed, "Optics." Rosa heard about it from a neighbor on the bus, who didn't mean harm and caused it anyway. By the time she reached the mansion, the air had a different weight, as if the house knew shame as a scent. Didn't go to the kitchen. She went straight to the family room where Ethan was aligning crayons by length, not color, his new system for a day that needed new rules. She smiled, because her smile wasn't for the house. You want to draw maps? She asked. Can. Draw the museum. We can draw how the trolley smelled. Ethan glanced toward the hallway, sensing the wrongness, the way some animals sense impending weather. He demanded, and she hummed the soft song she used for storms. Daniel arrived minutes later, anger cloaked in formality. I'm so sorry, he said. The words tripped. He didn't say them often. I'll fix it. Lifted a shoulder. You can't fix what people want to believe, she said, but you can decide what home believes. He looked at her and felt absurdly like a boy at the door of a church. Home believes that you are safe here, he said, and valued, and paid too little for what you do. Shh. She laughed then, a short, pure sound that cracked his chest open another half-inch. That last part is always true, wherever I go. They could have ridden it out, maybe. People, well-meaning people, have a way of making everything worse in clusters. A PR strategist showed up uninvited and suggested quietly moving Rosa to a less visible role. A friend texted Daniel a joke that was not a joke. Careful, man. You'll end up in a movie with bad lighting. Carmen, loyal to order more. Then two people suggested to Rosa that maybe she should take a break until the dust settled. Dust doesn't settle. It swirls until someone opens a door. Rosa opened it. She packed her bag with the economy of women who have had to leave quickly. Before. She wrote a note in careful print. Ethan, I will be back tomorrow unless you want a day of quiet. You can choose. My song is in your box. She tucked a small music box, cheap, tinny, precious, into the drawer where Ethan kept treasures. When you turned the crank, it played the melody she hummed. The near lullaby that had become a bridge. When Ethan found the note, he read it slowly. He didn't always like words. They were slippery rocks in a stream. But he held these as if they were pebbles that warmed in his hand. He turned the crank. The music didn't sound like her. He slapped the box closed and let out a sound, long, thin, piercing, that made Daniel drop a glass in the kitchen. He ran.
Oh.
Rosa had already gone. Ethan stood in the family room, shoes off, hair wild with static, tears drawing lines that made him look older. His fist hit his thighs in a rhythm that said, the map shifted and no one consulted me. Daniel reached for him. Rongathan recoiled, moved to the door. Rongathan screamed. He stood still, better breath, better and, then did the thing Rosa did. He sat on the floor near enough to be there, far enough not to trap. I'm here, he said. I'm here. I'm not leaving. It felt like lying and like truth. He wasn't leaving the room. But he had left so many rooms on so many days that the word had lost weight. Ethan's scream thinned as screams do, a tide that cannot defy the moon forever. He collapsed forward, forehead to carpet, hands over his ears. Daniel counted. He didn't know what he was counting. Seconds, the beats in a prayer for which he didn't know the words. I made a mistake, allowed to know one and everyone. I let other people decide how big our house is. He reached into the drawer and took the music box, turned the crank once, then stopped. I can't sing like her, he said, voice cracking on like, but I can try to be like her. I can ask you what you need. Ethan lifted his head by degrees. Need, he repeated. Not a question, an inventory. Do you need quiet? Daniel asked. Do you need me close or far? Do you need the door open or closed? You need to go to the backyard where the sky is big? Door, Ethan said. Open. Daniel opened it. Me. Close, Ethan said, and the word was permission and mercy. Daniel sat closer. Rosa, he asked gently, do you want her to come back tomorrow? Ethan's mouth trembled. Now, he said, and then, as if the word had pried open a gate, Rosa, now. Daniel closed his eyes. Pride is loud until love removes its batteries. He called her. She answered on the second ring. I'm sorry, she said before he could speak. I should have told you I was stepping out. I didn't want to make it worse. I made it worse, he said, and the words tasted new and clean. If you're willing, if you want to, please come back. We will handle the house. We will handle the world. I need you to know that your job is not contingent on secrecy, or on pretending not to matter. Silence hummed, and in the silence, a decision grew. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. Tell him I'm borrowing the bus's patience." When she arrived, Ethan ran. He didn't run often. Running lifted him out of lines he relied on. But he ran and collided with her legs, and then let her lower herself to the floor so his head could find its way to her shoulder. She breathed his storm back into sky. Over his head, Rosa looked at Daniel. He had rehearsed a speech while the bus inched through traffic. He would offer a new title, Erase Protections. He would announce policies and boundaries and standards. Instead, he said, "I will not ask you to be invisible in a house where you are loved." Rosa nodded once, a benediction, and a demand. "Then don't," she said. "And don't make me choose between dignity and proximity." "I won't," he said. He didn't know yet how to make that true, in a world built for optics and not for boys who line up crayons by length. But he would learn. That night, after Ethan slept, they sat at the kitchen island with 2 mugs of tea and a plate of coconut. Buns like a treaty. Daniel told her the truth. "I feel something," he said, and there it was, naked and trembling on the counter between them. "For you, it's not neat. It's not convenient. And I don't want to make your work unsafe. Or my son's world confusing." Rosa stared into her tea as if it held a compass. "I feel something too," she said. "But I have a boy who taught me a long time ago that feelings don't cancel responsibilities. So we go slow. We build in daylight. We tell the truth. We make sure Ethan's map stays readable." He breathed out, a sound that might one day be laughter. "Daylight," he repeated. Outside, a camera clicked in the bushes. Inside, the kettle sang, and Rosa took it off the burner before it whistled. Daylight wasn't a speech. It was policies that changed the shape of a house. The next morning, Daniel called his team into the study. He didn't apologize for the tabloid. He didn't threaten the paper. He didn't hire more men to move other men around, he said. "Our home is not a set. We'll not restrict staff to corridors like air ducts. If you can't live with that, you can't work here." He installed a privacy hedge on the public-facing property line. It's not because he was hiding something, but because he refused to let strangers write his son's narrative by way of long lenses. He sat with Ethan and drew a picture schedule for the week boxes with icons. It's like a language you invent with someone who trusts you more when you show your work. Rosa came every morning. Sometimes Malik came in the afternoon, a tall boy with a shy mouth and hands that wanted to dismantle and rebuild everything he touched. He and Ethan found each other the way people do who don't demand each other be louder to be heard. Malik showed Ethan how a toaster glowed without touching it. Ethan showed Malik the pleasure of lining resistors by stripe order. One day, Daniel found the 2 boys under the kitchen table, a nest of wires between them, whispering numbers like a code. He ducked down and asked, "May I join?" They nodded. And he slid in, knees knocking a chair leg, heart knocking the inside of his ribs. "Red is fast," Ethan said, tapping a wire. "Blue is calm," Malik said, tapping another. "If we put them together in the right way, the light knows what to do." Daniel nodded solemnly. "That's what I'm trying to do too." He started going in late. He started leaving early. His assistant, astonished, rearranged meetings. Like furniture in a room whose true purpose had finally been recognized. Investors called and were told that Mr. Carter would return the call after dinner. Some grumbled. Some didn't notice. The world surprisingly didn't sink. Rosa watched. All of this with a gaze that missed nothing. She didn't flatter him. She didn't congratulate him for things other men do without praise. She held him to the standard she gave herself. Show up, tell the truth, hold steady. When he reached for her hand once in the hallway and felt her, flinched because Ethan stood 3 feet away watching, he let go and later said, "I'm sorry. I want him to understand what love looks like, not to worry that his map will blur." "Then we give love a shape he can read," she said. "Predictable. Kind. With labels he can peel off when he's ready to make his own." They talked at the kitchen island. They talked on the back steps after bedtime, knees touching because the steps were narrow, not because they were careless. He told her about the deals that had felt like winning and then like emptiness. She told him about the church basements, where she'd learned to stretch food. The bus routes that worked as lullabies when Malik was a baby and wouldn't sleep unless the world moved. They didn't kiss for a long time. They didn't need to. The space between them grew, the way healthy things do, quietly. In soil, they watered together. One afternoon, Rosa suggested a small party. Just the house staff, Malik, a neighbor kid. Ethan tolerated, cupcakes baked in silence because the mixer was too loud. "We can teach the house how to celebrate softly," she said. They strung paper chains and laid out noise-canceling headphones beside the forks like honored guests. When the candles were lit only 3, 8 would be chaos. Ethan didn't blow. He waved his hand slowly until the flames bowed, and everyone clapped by wiggling fingers in the air. It looked like a school of fish agreeing. Later, Daniel stood at the sink, washing bowls, because the dishwasher cycle might bother Ethan. Rosa dried. Water ran over his wrists, warm, steady. "I used to think love was a transaction I could afford," he said. "A thing I could do well by doing more of what I'm already good at. And now," she asked, "and now it feels like learning. To read with my non-dominant hand," he said. Slow, messy, real. She touched his elbow. "You're doing fine." News moved on. It always does. The tabloid found a new fire to fan. The hedge grew in green permanence where there had been intrusion. And inside, changes made their own quiet press releases. A chalkboard by the door with the day's map. A basket of headphones and fidget toys by the couch. A shelf where Ethan's cars lived when they weren't racing. A small framed photo of Malik and Ethan under the kitchen table like engineers, grinning like boys who knew how to build bridges from spare parts. The first time they took a trip was small. A day at the beach early in the morning before crowds, before the sun decided who it wanted to burn. The ocean was loud. They stood where the waves breathed gently. Rosa showed Ethan how to let the water touch his toes and run away. Daniel learned how to listen for the wrong loud and the right loud. They found shells with holes through them. Rosa called them lucky, and Ethan threaded them onto a string and hung the string on the rearview mirror so the car would know where home was. On the drive back, Ethan hummed the music box tune. It had become his lullaby, and now it belonged to all 3 of them. 2 notes, a pause, a small ascending ladder, a return. Daniel didn't sing, but he drove in rhythm, and it felt like singing. That evening, after the house exhaled, and the dishwasher was off, and the nightlight made it small. Moon on the wall, Daniel stood with Rosa on the back steps. The sky was a color paint company's name poorly. He turned to her and said, "I don't want to rush you, or us, or this. But I would like to take you to dinner, in daylight, with your son if he wants, with mine if he wants, or just us, if. That's better for the map." She laughed softly. "Dinner is just dinner," she said. "But we can make it a promise if we bring our sons' names with us when we go." "Then let's promise," he said. They went, 2 weeks later, to a small place where the owner knew how to dim lights without theater. The boys sat across from each other and arranged sugar packets by hue, and the owner brought out bowls of plain rice unasked. Daniel reached for the bill, and Rosa reached too, and they both laughed because they knew what that gesture meant in the language. They were writing partnership, not patronage. He paid anyway. She let him, because the next time she would. And because partnership is not keeping score. It's keeping balance. On the way home, Ethan fell asleep, head tilting toward Rosa, the way it always did, as if her shoulder had learned the curve of his skull because it loved to. Malik leaned his head against the window and watched the city. Daniel drove, and for once he didn't feel the need to be anywhere faster than the car could go. At the house, they carried sleeping boys to beds, adjusted blankets, set music boxes within reach. In the hallway and the quiet, Daniel took Rosa's hand. They didn't hide. They didn't perform. They stood in their own home, in their own story, written in a hand that would never be neat and would always be legible to the people who mattered. He said, "Live here." She said, "Thank you for making a place worth teaching." In Ethan's room, the nightlight made its little moon. On the dresser, 3 red cars waited in a row. Fast, fast, fast. In the morning they would race, and somewhere between the last breath of evening and the first brave sound of dawn, a house that used to be all glass learned how to be a home.